Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today, we are visiting a manor house in Gałki to learn the history and the functionings of a manor house owned by Polish nobility. We will speak to the owner of this very manor house, Waldemar Guiszki, about the history of Polish manor houses. The manor house of Świata, or the Polish nobility, served as a center for Polish culture throughout centuries. And during times of war and the partition of the nation, it also functioned as a bastion of freedom. During the time when Poland is partitioned by foreign powers, I know that the Polish manor house is also a base of operation when it comes to organizing resistance and solidarity movements. I was wondering if you can elaborate more on how it's conducted.
Dwór był zawsze bazą powstańczą w czasie wzrywów narodowych.
The manor was always a base for uprisings. During all the uprisings, insurrections, it was the center of the fight against the invader in every partition. The manor paid a terrible price for this, the worst one can imagine, particularly in the Russian partition. The gentlest punishment was being forcibly deported to Siberia, leaving your family, losing your manor and all your assets, and losing all contact with Poland.
Oczywiście w to miejsce wchodzili już Rosjanie, rosyjscy właściciele.
Russian owners would then take their place, and was often the case that the heir was simply murdered. This occurred most intensely during the Bolshevik onset, particularly to the east, but also during the Second World War, when Poland was attacked by the Germans from the west and Russians from the east.
Z zachodu i przez Rosjan ze wschodu.
When the people sent by Hitler or Stalin went into a manor house, they began by murdering the heir. That's unfortunately how it happened. The manor was always the basis for national uprisings, also during the Second World War, and the struggle of the Polish Home Army and the National Armed Forces, but as I said, they paid the most terrible price.
Za to najstraszliwszą cenę.
Resistance can be taken in many forms, and we know that the armed resistance is actually a small minority of the entire movement against the partition of the nation. And can you tell me more about how that part of the resistance is being conducted?
We dworze spotykały się dwie polskie wielkie tradycje, dzięki którym odzyskaliśmy niepodległość.
Two great Polish traditions met in the manors, thanks to which we regained independence. Primarily the Romantic tradition, when, sorry to say, but sometimes we went gung-ho into fights, when we had no real chance but the uprising erupted anyway.
W momencie przyszła refleksja, po powstaniu styczniowym zwłaszcza.
At a certain point though, particularly after the January uprising, there was some reflection that this path is ineffective. In relation to this, we started to do things in a different way. Alongside the Romantic tradition, the Positivist tradition came about based on the idea that the society is an organism and all the components of this organism make up the whole, so those who are at the top had a duty to take care of those who were below them in the hierarchy.
Mieli obowiązek dbać o tych stojących niżej w hierarchii.
So the peasants had to be educated, taught to read and write, taken care of medically, assisted in learning professions, taught crafts. It was mainly about having peace of mind that this organic work in the lower layers, this positivist work, would have a positive effect when placed into a military capacity in the future and help in regaining independence. There was this peasant mania, such as in Galicia. Marrying a peasant wasn't seen as a misalliance anymore. This happened. Lucjan Rydel and the most famous Polish wedding described in the famous play by Wyspiański, Wesele, or Wedding, it described a wedding with a peasant girl, a type of marriage that would once be unthinkable. So it was about seeing those in the lower levels of society as partners. The nobility began to understand this, implement it, and raise the level of those at the lower levels.
Podnosić ich poziom, głównie jeśli chodzi o światę.
Next up, we will talk with the historian Krzysztof Jabłonka about the role the Polish manor house played for the resistance against the partitioning powers during the 19th century, both during the period of active resistance, during the national uprisings, but also in the organic work of preserving Polish identity and culture. The Polish manor was the seed of patriotism and was also the base of operations when it comes to resistance against the foreign powers that partitioned Poland at the time. And I was wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more about it.
Niemal od razu po rozdzieleniu ziem Rzeczpospolitej.
Immediately after the separation of lands in the Polish Republic, and let's remember that all 4 lands of the Republic were separated during the time of the partitions, the manors became the one place that did not allow the invader to enter through their gates. The family of the marshal and great Polish patriot Józef Piłsudski is a well-known example. His mother never let in a single Russian soldier, and she only spoke to them in French, never using the language of the enemy.
Nie używając języka wroga. Stąd można wyprowadzić.
From this, it can be derived that the Polish manor became the fortress of independence. All the uprisings, and there were 7 of them, from Tadeusz Kościuszko to Józef Piłsudski, were propped up by a network of manors, Jewish taverns, and monasteries and presbyteries. There was a war for the allegiance of the Polish peasant. In the region of Greater Poland, this went very smoothly, because for a short moment during the Napoleonic period, the peasants were given freedom, and shortly afterwards their own
Przez
land.
krótki moment epoki napoleońskiej chłopom nadano wolność, a wkrótce i ziemię. Stali się obywatelami.
They became citizens. On the other hand, in the Russian partition, serfdom remained. The peasants spoke Polish, but they hardly even knew what Poland was. A tragic situation occurred in the Austrian partition, where in the face of an uprising against the Austrians by the Polish nobility, the Austrian authorities knowingly provoked and consented for the peasants, who were very often very simple people and illiterate, to attack and slaughter the nobility in 1846. In truth, the majority of the nobility left their manors and went on to the cities, but the management remained, the people responsible for the assets, and they died.
Z dymem stanowiło to straszliwą traumę. Walka Polaków z Polakami, bratobójstwo.
500 manors were destroyed. This caused a great trauma. Poles fighting against Poles, fratricide organized by foreigners. The aim was to avoid this in the future, and from this came the biggest Polish uprising in 1863, which was based on the manors fighting for the affranchisement of the peasants. This means giving the peasants land and citizens' rights.
Chwilą, kiedy rząd narodowy uchwalił decyzję o przekazaniu ziemi chłopom.
From the moment the national government made the decision to transfer land to the peasants, the gathered Congress of Gentry announced that the peasants must be given coats of arms. They must be considered nobility now.
Poziom szlachecki. Carat już tylko to zadekretował.
The peasants were considered at the level of the nobility. The Tsardom decreed it. Finally, towards the end of the 19th century, peasants in the terrain of the Polish kingdom, land occupied by the Russians, were freed in the best way in the entire Russian Empire. They received the biggest amounts of land. They were given parts of forests, lakes and ponds. They became landowners. Their children and grandchildren would go on to fight for an independent and civic Poland, which would become a true homeland. We have this Poland now, although the period of Bolshevik occupation and the rule of the communists destroyed the manors, which they saw as hotbeds of nationalism and backward ideas and feudal relations. They destroyed them in a horrific way. Countryside had a lot of respect for manor houses, for the most part, because they were always the centers of culture. Here you could receive medical help, and most importantly, this is where young girls were taught how to run the household, how to sit by the table, how to behave in a cultured way.
Dziewczyny, jak zarządzać domem, jak siadać przy stole, jak kulturę podtrzymać.
Noble ideas permeated the town folk and vice versa. Folk music reached the manor houses. This is how a modern new Polish nation was created, from Polish folk customs and the nobility as if melted together. Of course, in between there were also the middle classes and a group of Polish Jews mentioned before. They constituted the fourth state of the Republic. The whole thing rested on the support of the Polish Church.
Całość spajał Kościół polski.
The tradition of Polish manor houses have seen a revival after the fall of communism. Hopefully, more and more of these amazing estates will be repaired and rebuilt back to its glorious days. That's it for today. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.